Tonight on Primetime Politics, Canadian sovereignty back in the campaign conversation.
Oh, I don't want to predict other nations' elections.
This is Canada. We decide what happens here.
The American president talking tariffs and the 51st state, and the Liberal leader under fire over what was said in their phone call. Coming up, more on the Trump factor and what to watch for between now and Election Day. Our political strategists weigh in, along with Darrell Bricker of Ipsos Global Public Affairs. Plus, taking stock of the race in Ontario and the key races in and around Toronto. A conversation with journalists Robert Benzie and Sabrina Nanji. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, I'm Andrew Thompson with you tonight. Michael Serapio is away on assignment. The U.S. president says it's not appropriate to get involved in Canada's election. Still, Donald Trump is back on the campaign radar, the president threatening even higher auto tariffs, and again floating the 51st state idea, an idea he also raised in last month's phone call with Mark Carney. Now, at the time, Carney said Trump respected Canadian sovereignty. Here's what the Liberal leader is saying today.
Yes or no, did Mr. Trump bring up the 51st state in his call with you?
I said that he did. Him raising something, and then where the discussion is. He has these things in his mind. This is not news. He raises it all the time. Okay? But then the question is, what's going to be done with it? And does he understand where we stand, more particularly where I stand? He is under no illusions. Never, absolutely not, never. Move on. It's two sovereign nations coming together, negotiating our partnership, our relationship.
Now, even before Mark Carney spoke those words, the other party leaders were criticizing his portrayal of that March phone call with the U.S. president. Take a look.
Well, that's a question for Mr. Carney to answer. I wasn't there. But what's clear is we will stand up for our sovereignty. We will never be an American state.
Canadians are wondering, well, what else is going to happen? If he's not going to tell us about a phone call, what about the details of the negotiation? And what about what he's willing to trade away?
Just the show of a man who wanted to pretend something which appears today not to be true. I believe many people in Canada and in Quebec will say, what the hell is that? And if that is not true, what else is not true?
All right, well, let's bring in our political strategists for their take. Susan Smith is a former Liberal strategist, co-founder and principal at Blue Sky Strategy Group. Jordan Paquet is vice president at Blue Sky and a former Conservative strategist. And George Soule is former director of communications for the NDP. Good to see all three of you here once again. So we have the Liberal leader facing a lot of questions about that March phone call with the president, eventually saying that, yes, Donald Trump did raise the 51st state idea. So, Susan, we saw the other leaders all criticizing Mark Carney on this, saying he's not being straight with Canadians. Do you think this could become an issue for Mark Carney during the final days of this campaign?
No, I think Mr. Blanchette's language was the best as it applies to this entire discussion today. What the hell is this all about? I mean, this is insanity to me. Carney spoke to Trump. They discussed broad principles. There was a broad readout. Prime Minister Carney said that Mr. Trump respected the sovereignty of Canada. Yesterday, Mr. Trump was talking again about Canada as the 51st state, and the Oval Office talking again about raising tariffs. And so that is the key issue. I don't know what the other leaders are sort of on and on about. It's clear Mr. Carney and Prime Minister Carney said, no way, never. Canada will never be the 51st state, and it's clear that he set the table for a negotiation post-election with President Trump. That's the only issue. In my view, the opposition leaders are trying to insert themselves into the ballot question, which at the moment favors Prime Minister Carney.
Okay, Jordan, weigh in on this. What do you think of how the leaders are reacting to this and this notion that Mr. Carney is being clear with the answer that he gave today?
Sure. I think he was certainly a little awkward and uncomfortable today. It's been a while since we've seen him sort of in that rattled phase, answering questions from the media. Several reporters kind of went at him quite hard because it was something a little bit different than what he said previously. He said, oh, no, in that phone call, Donald Trump didn't threaten our sovereignty. No, that didn't happen. He respects me, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. Putting that aside, when the Liberals are talking about this issue, that's the issue that they want to be talking about. I think they have gotten a little nervous because the ballot question has shifted more towards the issue of change and who best can bring change to Canada after 10 years of Liberal government. The Liberals don't want to talk about that. They want to continue to fearmonger about Donald Trump.
What do you think about this, George? Is it good for the Liberals to have this as an issue, even though Mr. Carney's being criticized? The very fact that Canada-U.S. relations back on the table more as an issue, President Trump talking about Canada again. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, for sure. I think that, Mr. Carney's best days are always the days that we're talking about Trump and where he gets to be prime minister rather than a candidate, because he's still getting used to the political games. I have here, just to be clear about what was asked, on the 28th, after the call, he was asked, did he call us the 51st state? And Mr. Carney didn't answer. He just went on to say, this is a call between two leaders, their respective governments between two sovereign nations. He was asked again, strictly for a yes or no question, and he said the president respected Canada's sovereignty today, both in private and public comments.
Yes.
So, but when you let him say we're the 51st state, he's clearly not respecting our sovereign nation or our sovereignty in that conversation. What I don't understand about this is, first of all, I agree. What else is he hiding? Because it could have been easy. Yet clearly, what he wanted to do, he wanted his position to be able to say, "Look, I'm having good, responsible conversation with Donald Trump." He could have said, "You know what? He tried that 51st state stuff. I told him to go shove it." And then after that, we had a really strong collegial conversation. Donald Trump's tweet after that said, he called him the prime minister. The whole narrative would have been fine, but Carney, clearly intentionally, because you can hear in those questions, he was specifically asked about the 51st state question and chose not to answer. He left that out. And that's important when we're talking about conversations with the president and what else we're going to negotiate and give and take on.
Yes, Susan, why not just say at the time, at the end of March, this is what happened, this is what was said? I
think the Prime Minister was taking the high road, whether you go line by line from a conversational thing. He didn't address it specifically there, but he said that the President respected Canada's sovereignty, and we're going to move on to a NAFTA negotiation or a USMCA negotiation after the outcome of the election. I think this is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP trying to insert themselves desperately into the conversation in the final bit of the campaign. And the same thing applies to Mr. Poilievre, because when the question is about who is best to negotiate with Donald Trump, who's got the best plan to protect Canada's economy, build it in a new direction in the face of Trump and tariffs, and also while negotiations are going on, Mark Carney clearly has the confidence of the Canadian people in that. So this is why it's like a tempest in a teapot for me. I don't even really understand what the fuss is about. I really think Canadian voters are going to be equally as confused, and just boil it right down to, on Monday morning when they go to the ballot box, Trump, he's barking again about 51st state. He's barking again about auto tariffs. He's barking again about other tariffs. Who's the guy, because it's going to be a guy, that's best positioned to lead us in dealing with Trump? And despite what Mr. Singh would want, that isn't going to be a public negotiation anyway. Everybody at this table knows give and take in a negotiation, successful negotiation, happens behind the doors, and the broad stroke stuff gets discovered.
Just really quickly, she's right. Absolutely. Whenever asked who's best to negotiate with Trump, Mark Carney wins that poll. Absolutely. That's where we're at right now in this situation, which is why none of the opposition parties would have brought this up. This came out through the media. None of us want to talk about Trump, because every time we say Trump, Mark Carney's numbers go up, and he's been quiet for a while. This came out. It benefits the Liberals to be able to talk about Trump. And the only question is, why, when asked specifically, did the president call us the 51st state, did the prime minister not say yes? He chose not to. After being asked, I had two examples. That whole press conference, if you go through the March 28th press conference, he gets asked over and over again, and he chose to not tell the whole truth at the very least. And so that's important when we're talking about someone's going to negotiate.
Well, I think this is a matter of the Liberals trying to leak something, and it just kind of blew up in their face a little bit. Do I think this is going to torch their campaign? No, not at all. But it could remind some voters that are still on the fence about somebody that's new to politics that we have somebody who's had a little bit of a relationship with the truth, a little bit of troublesome relationship on certain issues. I'm not saying that we're lying, but like the issue about the Brookfield asset management, when that decision was made, all these other things that just gets people to know they don't know who Mark Carney is, and issues like this could just help remind them, put some doubt back in their mind.
Okay, you mentioned the Conservative leader, Susan Smith, so let's talk about Pierre Poilievre now. Let's talk about Pierre and the race in Carleton, because we have these two stories coming out yesterday about the race in his own riding, suggesting that his own seat could be at risk after 21 years, that the party is sending more resources into that riding. Jordan, let me start with you. What are you hearing? Is this an actual risk where we could see a leader possibly losing his seat here?
No. He's very safe in Carleton. I'm not going to knock the reporting on anybody, because I'm sure they had some sources outside the campaign that said, oh, look at this, people are going into it. But no, Pierre's very safe in the Carleton riding. I mean, he's been there for a long, long time. He's there running as Prime Minister now. Having extra door knockers go out into ridings in the Ottawa area that are staffers is not a news story, really, in the greater scheme of things. I think if you look into Nepean, look at the number of former senior Liberal cabinet ministers, look at Mark Carney's spouse has been out there, look at other senior Liberals who've been in that area the whole time. The exact same thing's happening. You have people in the area, you deploy them to where they have to go, but no, Pierre's very safe in his area.
Okay, Susan, weigh in on this. Do you think this is simply an effort to make the race in Pierre Poilievre's own riding look closer than it actually is?
I think it will be a close race in that riding. Bruce Fanjoy, who's the Liberal candidate, has been canvassing for 2 years solid. And there are a lot of, he's been raising money. I heard like $15,000 a day or over the weekend or something was coming, like big numbers were coming into the campaign. He's worked super hard. I think it will be a race. It will be one of the seats that we will all be watching on election night. I don't think it's a slam dunk for Mr. Poilievre. It would surprise me if he didn't win it, but I think there are many, many motivated voters. There's also that crazy long ballot in the riding there that you're going to have to hunt your way down to find your preferred candidate's name, and there could be some dilution there that could impact him.
I think that impacts anybody looking for an opposition vote, though, like quickly. Like if they're going to vote for somebody other than Pierre, they'll check off somebody else's name, not necessarily that, whereas the Conservative vote that in that riding is very, very strong.
Well, George, we've also talked about the NDP leader and the risk he faces in his own riding of Burnaby Central. It seems we're talking more during this campaign compared to past campaigns about what the leaders face in their own ridings compared to what's going on nationally.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't buy that Pierre Poilievre's in trouble in his riding. I live in Nepean. I don't buy that Mr. Carney's in trouble there either. I think people go in there knowing the leaders' names and wanting to vote for them. Every year it is a bit tough for Jagmeet and his riding for sure, and obviously where our numbers are, it's challenging. But in the same way that we look at Nepean and Carleton and anywhere, like riding polls hardly exist, and so people look at regions and try to spread them out and make that work. So we don't have accurate look at what's going on the ground, and I'll tell you, sure, there are a lot of people putting some work into Jagmeet's riding, and I'm hearing things are coming back quite well. Okay, we have a moment left, so let's talk about the last days of the campaign, including the leaders' campaigns. You've all got experience working on campaigns, so I want to ask you very quickly, tell me what you are looking for over the next 72 hours as the leaders, as the parties make their closing arguments to Canadians. Jordan, let me go to you first.
It's just a day-to-day blitz of rallies, getting people out door knocking. The war rooms probably by tomorrow will start to clear out and empty. People will be deployed out to wherever possible, wherever there's close, tight ridings. Look for where the leaders are traveling to. In Mr. Pierre's case, he was in Nova Scotia. He's going to make a stop through Oakville this weekend. He's going back out to BC. So he's doing a blitz across the whole country, which is just designed to show some momentum for what is going to be a very, very tight race on Monday.
Okay, Susan, what should we expect from the Liberals?
Well, it's a mad sprint. There'll be a coast-to-coast travel, as usually happens, but I'm watching for the Liberals to go on offense. There are ridings that, Mr. Carney was in Trois-Rivières this week. That's not a riding that Liberals typically win. So I'm watching for where they go that aren't places that they hold seats, because I do think that this is where they have some confidence that they could take these seats in addition to it. So I think that's what you'll see, is where are they going? Some leaders will be saving the furniture, others will be looking to expand the rooms on the House, maybe.
Okay, George, last word to you. What will the NDP House look like over the next 3 days?
Well, quickly on going into other rooms, I mean, Mark Carney's not necessarily focused on defeating Conservatives. He's spent a lot of time on the island recently trying to go after some strong progressive women who are New Democrats there. So that's an interesting strategy when Liberals pretend they're against the Conservatives, but they really run after the progressives. Jagmeet has been pretty open about this. I mean, there's no lying about where our numbers are at, reminding folks, and he's going to go to specific places and remind folks that if you want to defeat the Conservatives in these ridings and you have a New Democrat incumbent, then vote for that New Democrat, and they'll go and deliver some results for you. Okay, we're certainly watching between now and Monday. George, Susan, Jordan, thank you so much, as always.
Andrew.
Thank you.
Now let's take a deeper look at what Canadian voters are thinking as we head into the final weekend of this federal campaign. With me now is Darrell Bricker, CEO of Ipsos Global Public Affairs. Darrell, good to see you.
Well, thanks for having me on, Andrew.
Now, 3 weeks ago, you were actually with us here on Primetime Politics, and you said the tariff issue being front and center was an ideal environment for Mark Carney. Your latest polling on the leaders actually shows him with a big lead over Pierre Poilievre when it comes to managing the economy, when it comes to Donald Trump. Is that still ultimately what this election is boiling down to?
Yeah, if it's about statecraft and it's about the macro economy, so the economy, Mark Carney does very well. But interestingly enough, when it comes down to affordability and I would say kitchen table type economics, Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives do better than the Liberals, which is surprising because this is usually the territory that the NDP own. So the Conservatives have been successful in repositioning themselves on the question of economics. So it's not just about big business and managing issues to do with international trade and that kind of thing, but that element of kitchen table and economics, which tends to be very powerful with voters.
Okay, and Pierre Poilievre still does trail Mark Carney when voters talk about someone having a hidden agenda or someone who'll say anything to get elected. But as you say, Poilievre has made up ground on issues like fighting for the middle class and keeping election promises. So let's talk a bit more about the Conservative campaign. Where does that leave Mr. Poilievre at this point?
Well, I think you've seen it quite clearly in the way that the two leaders have been talking to Canadians. One of them is really focusing on his strength, Mark Carney, dealing with Donald Trump and talking about the macro economy and talking about, as I said before, statecraft, whereas Pierre Poilievre's really been focused on the time for a change message. He keeps pounding on about that, and the change he really wants to see, which is about what goes into your paycheck and how much money you have available to live the life that every Canadian wants to live. So both of them have been successful doing this. The question is which issue has the priority as we go into the last stages of the campaign. And now that the Trump issue's kind of died down a little bit, it seems to be more on the economy, or the personal economy, which is why the polls are tightening up a bit.
Okay, well, let's talk about the polls tightening up a bit. Earlier this week, Ipsos reported that nationally the gap is tightening between Liberals and Conservatives. So let's talk about the national picture and the geography of the campaign right now in these final days. What are you watching?
Well, what I'm really watching right now is the two different races that are going on. One of them is west of the Quebec-Ontario border. The other one is east of the Quebec-Ontario border. If it's west of the Quebec-Ontario border, it's a majority Conservative election, if those are the only people voting. East of the Ontario-Quebec border, it's a pretty strong majority Liberal majority. So the real question, the swing area in all of this is the province of Ontario, and particularly the car commuting suburbs around the big cities. Those ones seem to be to a certain extent in flux, and we've been seeing the numbers in the province of Ontario tighten up over the last little while. The Liberals still have a pretty good lead, but the question is, as we get into the tail end of this campaign, whether or not it'll close up even more. And if it does, then we're going to have a very interesting and exciting election day.
Right, because you talked a couple of moments ago about those two big pillars for this campaign, the Canada-US factor and the affordability factor. These are obviously really big issues, not just across the country, but especially in Ontario with the auto sector. Do you see one or other of those big issues really taking precedence in those key ridings right now?
Depending on what's in the news, one or the other could be taking precedence. So Donald Trump decided to talk again about Canada being the 51st state today. And also the issue of whether or not Mark Carney was confronted with that possibility in his call with Mr. Trump. So we've raised the issue of Donald Trump and trade with the United States. Again, that's something that helps the Liberals. So the more that we're talking about that in the news cycle, the more the election seems to be focused on dealing with that issue, which definitely helps the Liberals. But as that dies down, we move over to the affordability question, and that's something that really does well for the Conservatives.
Okay, I want to end with you on the issue of undecided voters. We had millions of voters at advance polls, but for those waiting until Monday to cast their ballots, how many undecided voters are there actually still out there for the parties to target?
Well, there's a lot of leaners, I would call them. So they may be leaning one way or the other, but one of the things that we've been seeing in our polling over the years is that campaigns have really changed. In the old days, most people actually made their minds up before the election, and all you had to do was identify them and get them into get them to vote on election day. Very little persuasion happened. These days, we see wild fluctuations in the polls as people change their minds from day to day. So the last 72 hours of the campaign becomes incredibly important. And we find in our surveys up to 10% of the population doesn't make its mind up till it's actually voting. So this campaign could very much hinge on some very last minute things happening. Like I said, the last 72 hours, but maybe even the last 24 hours.
All right, we'll have to leave it there for now. Darrell Bricker, always appreciate your insight. Thanks for this.
Thank you very much.
Now let's zero in on Canada's most populous province. That's Ontario, where 122 seats are at stake, including key ridings in the Greater Toronto area. Michael is on assignment, but earlier he spoke with a pair of journalists for their analysis. Well, to talk about how the campaign is looking right now in Ontario, we're joined by Robert Benzie, Queen's Park Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Sabrina Nanji, founder and writer of the Queen's Park Observer. Nice to see both of you.
Hey guys.
Hey Michael. Hey Sabrina.
Listen, Rob, I'm going to get you to start us out here because I know the Toronto Star has this election feature, the Signal, and it aggregates the polls like Eric Grenier does for the Red or Philippe Fournier does for 338 Canada. But when you look at Ontario right now, what does that picture look like? Do the Liberals still have an advantage?
Yes, they do, Michael, and they have held that advantage throughout the writ period. The Signal, it crunches all of the data from all of the publicly available polls into a supercomputer at Vox Pop Labs developed, and does thousands of simulations every day. And so it's pretty accurate. It was the most accurate aggregator in the 2021 election, and I don't see any reason why it won't be the most accurate in this election. And it has shown consistently the Liberals with between an 8 and 10 point lead in Ontario, and that is kind of what we've been hearing from Premier Doug Ford's campaign team. And the three of us talked a lot during the provincial election about Ford's political machine and his polling and so on. We've seen some of their polling in this election, and they're showing that it's a big lead for the Liberals in Ontario. And if you figure if the Liberals are at 48-49% in Ontario, and Doug Ford's Conservatives in a provincial election won 80 seats of 124 with 43%, well, what does 48-49% do in a 122 federal seat scenario? It could be more than 90 seats for Mark Carney's Liberals in this province.
Yeah, which of course would be a huge get because of course Ontario is the big one in terms of available ridings and seats. You know, Sabrina, the Conservatives have made this argument though that Canadians can't afford a fourth Liberal term. When you speak to people in your reporting, is that at all an issue, or is Mark Carney already viewed in a completely different light than Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, I think hands down, Mark Carney has really turned it around for the Liberals. It seems like they've shaken off all the baggage of Justin Trudeau. I think that was why Mark Carney, one of his first orders of business when he took over the Prime Minister's job was to make a big to-do about canceling the carbon tax, something that was very unpopular and poorly marketed by the Liberals themselves, right? And he nipped that in the bud. He got rid of it. And now he's getting a lot of that credit, especially in Ontario, just, from average voters, everyday folks that I talk to, rather than someone like Pierre Poilievre, who we know has spent years railing against it. We even heard him try to bring up Trudeau quite a bit in the federal leaders debate. But I think really Donald Trump has been another game changer in this whole thing. Benzie's been talking a lot about the polling. I too got a peek at, internal PC polling that had been done at the provincial level at the outset of the campaign. And, Poilievre and Carney were almost neck and neck. But now the more that Trump is in the headlines, I think Carney's background as a banker, an economically minded person, people are now just thinking we need a steady hand. Maybe he's the guy that can handle Trump, this, potential economic crisis. And also the fact that Ford and Carney get along really well. They made a big show about it. Not so much loving happening between the provincial and federal Conservatives, but I think also that people want to see, the partisan jabs put aside and want just governments that can work together. They've already elected Doug Doug Ford at Queen's Park. And now it seems that, Mark Carney is the guy to beat in Ontario.
Okay, let's dig into that, because you both have mentioned internal polling with the provincial PC party in Ontario. And through the course of this campaign, we've seen Corey tonight, the man who has essentially managed the Ontario Premier's 3 successful Conservative majority campaigns. He's essentially been throwing the Poilievre campaign team under the bus. What's behind this? How is this affecting the Conservative vote in Ontario, Rob?
Well, I mean, I think what Mr. Tonight has been doing is asking the question, why aren't the federal Conservatives following the provincial Conservative playbook, which was, as Sabrina just mentioned, to make the election all about Donald Trump. Doug Ford talked about Donald Trump every day on the campaign trail. His throne speech last week, he mentioned Donald Trump 12 times. In the Liberal platform that Mark Carney unveiled on the weekend, 8 times they mentioned Donald Trump. For whatever reason, Pierre Poilievre was slow to embrace the threat of the Trump tariffs as a ballot question. Some people say it's because he has supporters who themselves back Donald Trump, and that's probably, some of them that's true. I mean, certainly the federal Conservatives have been confiscating MAGA caps and things like that people are bringing to the rallies. They're not bringing them to the rallies because they want to embarrass the Conservatives. They're bringing them to the rallies because it's a message that they like. And I think that's a tough one for Mr. Poilievre to kind of navigate, because clearly Canadians feel very uncomfortable about this 51st state stuff and what the Trump tariffs are doing to our economy. So I think Mr. Ford was early to recognize that, and certainly Corey Tonight, they pivoted their election campaign. They didn't want the February 27th election campaign to be about Donald Trump. They originally wanted to be about the carbon tax and affordability. Well, to Sabrina's point, the carbon tax is now gone, and Donald Trump he looms large. So that's why the provincial Tories pounced on that, and that's why I think the federal Tories seem to be losing, at least here in Ontario. It's because they were late to that game.
I want to ask this question and ask for a quick answer from both of you. Given what we're observing in terms of the Conservative campaign, how that's being translated over in Ontario, translated also by their PC colleagues at Queen's Park, are there still ridings in play here for the Conservative Party, in particular the 905? Because it looks like the 416 is going to go solidly Liberal, maybe 1 or 2 NDP. But in terms of the 905, is that still in play for Conservatives? Rob?
I think the Tories hope so, Michael. They had a rally last night in Vaughan, north of Toronto, 2,500 people, which is a good number of people. The problem is the hall could have held a lot more. So now they had bad luck. It was the same night as the Leaf playoff game. But I don't know. He's not drawing the kind of massive crowds that would suggest they are about to sweep Brampton, Mississauga, York Region, Durham. So I don't know. I think they live in hope, and they do have a good ground game. So they're hoping that they can get their vote, and that their vote is committed enough that it'll show up on Monday.
Sabrina, quickly.
Yeah, I think there are some swing spots. Newmarket, Markham, Unionville, those were like really close races in the last round, and they tend to swing Liberal Conservative. But also voter turnout in the 905 in particular in the GTA is pretty low. So I think that, it ain't over yet, and it's really going to depend on getting out the vote and the ground game on election night.
Okay, Rob, Sabrina, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having us.
See you guys.
And that was Michael Serapio's conversation with Robert Benzie of the Toronto Star and Sabrina Nanji of the Queen's Park Observer. That's all for this edition of Primetime Politics. For Michael and all of us at CPAC, I'm Andrew Thompson. Thanks for watching. L'essentiel avec La France is next.